The stars had never looked so bright as they did from the bridge of the New Horizon. Captain Jake Morrison stood before the main viewing screen, watching the alien ship approach their position. It was massive, nearly 3 times the size of their exploration vessel, with a hull that seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that caught and reflected the distant starlight in beautiful patterns. This was it. Humanity's first contact with another intelligent species. Jake had been preparing for this moment his entire career. He had studied every protocol, read every theory about how first contact might go, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. His hands were steady as he adjusted his uniform, though his heart was beating fast. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. They all knew how important this moment was. Dr. Lisa Hayes stood beside him, her tablet ready with all the information they had prepared about humanity. She was the best scientist Jake had ever worked with, and if anyone could help make this first meeting successful, it was her. She had spent months preparing presentations about human culture, technology, and values. Everything they had learned suggested that sharing knowledge and showing goodwill was the best approach. The alien ship stopped just a few kilometers away. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a voice came through their communication system. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. Multiple tones layered together, creating words that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. Human vessel, you will prepare to receive our representatives. Do not attempt any hostile actions, or you will be destroyed. Jake exchanged a look with Lisa. The tone was not exactly friendly, but it was not completely hostile either. He activated the communication system and replied in his calmest voice. Alien vessel, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration ship New Horizon. We welcome you and look forward to peaceful first contact between our species. You may send your representatives when you are ready. Within an hour, the alien shuttle had docked with their ship. Jake and Lisa waited in the main conference room, along with Ambassador Paul Grant, who had been aboard specifically for this possibility. Paul was an experienced diplomat who had helped resolve conflicts between human colonies. If anyone could handle delicate negotiations, it was him. The airlock opened, and 3 aliens entered the room. Jake tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to be amazed. They were tall, nearly 7 feet each, with bodies that seemed to be covered in crystalline plates that shifted color as they moved. Their faces were angular, with large eyes that glowed with a soft blue light. They moved with a grace that suggested great physical strength, but also an almost liquid elegance. The one in the center stepped forward and spoke. When it did, the words seemed to come from all around them, rather than from its mouth. I am High Commander Vex Thul of the Zeltharan Empire. We have come to evaluate your species and determine whether you pose any threat to our expansion through this region of space. Ambassador Paul stepped forward with a diplomatic smile. Welcome, High Commander. I am Ambassador Paul Grant, representing humanity. We are honored by your visit and hope this can be the beginning of a beneficial relationship between our peoples. Vex Thul tilted its head slightly, and Jake could sense something like amusement in the gesture, though not the pleasant kind. Beneficial relationship. Vex Thul repeated the word slowly. Tell us, humans, what could your species possibly offer to the Zeltharan Empire? We have observed your colonies, your technology, your military capabilities. You are soft creatures who rely on cooperation rather than strength. Your weapons are primitive, your ships are slow, and your colonies are defended by agreements rather than force. Dr. Lisa stepped forward, activating her tablet. High Commander, While our technology may seem simple compared to yours, we have achieved remarkable things through cooperation and innovation. Our medical advances have eliminated most diseases that once killed our people. Our agricultural techniques can feed populations on worlds that were once considered uninhabitable. Our conflict resolution methods have prevented wars between our colonies for over 50 years. She gestured to her tablet, showing images and data. We would be happy to share this knowledge with your people. We believe that all intelligent species can benefit from working together, learning from each other, and building mutual prosperity. Vexthul looked at the tablet for a moment, then made a sound that might have been laughter. You offer us knowledge of how to grow food and cure diseases? Child, we mastered these concepts before your species learned to make fire. We have technology that can reshape entire worlds to our needs. We have weapons that can destroy fleets from distances your people cannot even measure. What need do we have for the primitive solutions of a species that still uses metal ships and chemical rockets? Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. High Commander, with respect, cooperation is not primitive. It's what has allowed humanity to spread across dozens of star systems without a single war between our colonies. It's what has allowed us to form alliances with other species we've encountered. Strength isn't just about having the biggest weapons or the fastest ships. Strength, Vexthul said, and this time there was clear amusement in its voice, is exactly about having the biggest weapons and the fastest ships. It is about the ability to take what you need and defend what you have. Your cooperation exists only because you are too weak to survive any other way. When faced with true power, your cooperation will crumble like sand. Ambassador Paul tried a different approach. Perhaps we could start with something simple. Cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, trade agreements that benefit both our peoples. We're not asking for anything from you. We're offering to share what we have freely. Share what you have freely, Vexthul repeated. Yes, this is exactly what we expected from your species. You offer charity because you hope for protection. You give away your resources because you fear those who might take them by force. This is not generosity. It is survival behavior from a prey species. The other two Zeltharans had remained silent throughout the conversation, but Jake noticed they seemed to be observing everything carefully. One of them was paying particular attention to Dr. Lisa's tablet and the information she had presented. Hi, Commander, Jake said, trying one more time. We're not offering these things out of fear. We're offering them because we believe that helping others makes everyone stronger. When we share our medical knowledge, it helps prevent diseases that might spread between species. When we share agricultural techniques, it helps ensure that everyone has enough food. When we work together to solve problems, we find better solutions than any of us could find alone. Vexthul stepped closer to Jake, and he could feel something like electricity in the air around the alien leader. Captain Morrison, your naivety is almost charming. You believe that by helping others you make yourself stronger, but what you actually do is make others stronger while remaining weak yourself. The Zeltharan Empire has conquered 47 star systems, not by helping others, but by demonstrating our superiority. Others serve us because they fear us, not because they love us. Fear is reliable, love is not. The meeting continued for another hour, but it became clear that the Zeltharans had no interest in anything humanity had to offer. They saw human cooperation as weakness, human generosity as desperation, and human peaceful expansion as evidence of military inability. As the meeting ended, Vexthul delivered what was clearly meant to be a final statement. The Zeltharan Empire has no need for charity from lesser beings. Your species may continue its expansion through this region, but do not interfere with our operations. We have evaluated you and found you harmless. The three Zeltharans left as suddenly as they had arrived. Jake, Lisa, and Paul sat in the conference room for several minutes in silence. Finally, Paul spoke. Well, that could have gone better. Lisa was still looking at her tablet. Did you notice the one on the left? It seemed interested in our information, even if it didn't say anything. Jake nodded. I noticed. Maybe they're not all as closed-minded as their leader. He stood up and walked to the viewing screen, watching the Zeltharan ship as it prepared to leave. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time they encountered this species. As the alien ship jumped to hyperspace, Jake activated the communication system and sent a simple message on all frequencies that the Zeltharans would be able to receive. Hi, Commander Vexthul and the Zeltharan Empire, this is Captain Jake Morrison. If you ever need help, you know where to find us. 3 years had passed since the first meeting with the Zeltharans, and the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The Zeltharan Empire had continued its expansion across the stars, adding new worlds to their territory with the same combination of overwhelming force and technological superiority that had made them the dominant power in their region of space. They had conquered 12 more star systems, each one falling within weeks of the Empire's arrival. The conquered species told similar stories. The Zeltharans would arrive in massive fleets, demonstrate their superior weapons by destroying a few military installations, and then demand complete surrender. Those who submitted were allowed to continue living on their worlds as subjects of the Empire. Those who resisted were wiped out completely. It was efficient, brutal, and effective. Meanwhile, humanity had taken a completely different path. Commander. Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the medical vessel Mercy, watching as her crew delivered supplies to a colony world that had been devastated by a plague. This was the 15th humanitarian mission she had overseen this year, and each one reinforced her belief that humanity's approach to expansion was not just morally superior to the Zeltharan method, but also more effective in the long run. Commander, called out Dr. Chris Johnson from his station, the colonists report that our new vaccine formula has reduced infection rates by 90%. They're asking if we can help them set up manufacturing facilities so they can produce it themselves. Amy smiled. Tell them yes, and see if we can get a team from the Henderson colony to help. They set up something similar last year. This was how humanity operated, not just solving problems, but teaching others to solve them as well. It took longer than conquest, but it created allies instead of enemies. The human colonies now numbered in the hundreds, spread across dozens of star systems. But unlike the Zeltharan Empire, these colonies were connected by choice rather than force. Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchanges had created a network of cooperation that grew stronger every year. When one colony faced a crisis, others would send aid without being asked. When new technologies were developed, they were shared freely rather than hoarded for military advantage. Dr. Kate Williams was one of the people responsible for monitoring the safety of all these colonies. From her observatory on Luna Station, she tracked stellar phenomena that might pose threats to human settlements. She had been doing this work for 15 years, and she had never seen anything quite like what she was observing now. This doesn't make sense, she muttered to herself as she studied the data on her screens. The readings from the Zeltharan home system were showing gravitational anomalies that should not exist. Space itself seemed to be warping in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. She called up more detailed scans and felt her blood turn cold. The mathematical models all pointed to the same impossible conclusion, a micro-black hole was forming in the Zeltharan system, right near their home star. If her calculations were correct, it would destabilize the entire system within months. Kate immediately sent her findings to Dr. Lisa Hayes, who was now the head of the Xenological Research Institute. Lisa had never stopped studying alien species, and she had become humanity's leading expert on the Zeltharans despite their limited contact. Lisa reviewed Kate's data with growing concern. She ran the calculations 3 times, hoping to find an error, but the mathematics was solid. The Zeltharan home system was facing a catastrophe that would make their previous conquests meaningless. "We have to warn them," Lisa told the emergency council that convened within hours of her confirmation of Kate's findings. Admiral Ben Carter, who had been promoted to head of colonial defense, shook his head. "Dr. Hayes, with respect, why should we warn people who have made it clear they consider us inferior? The Zeltharans have conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings. Maybe this is just cosmic justice." "Because it's the right thing to do," Lisa replied simply. "We don't help people because they deserve it. We help people because they need it." President Elena Martinez had been listening to the debate in silence. Finally, she spoke. "Dr. Hayes is correct. We'll send the warning. But I want it to be official. A formal communication from the human government to the Zeltharan Empire." The IAC message was sent through all available channels, complete with Kate's data and Lisa's analysis. It explained the threat in clear terms and offered human assistance in evacuation efforts if needed. The response came back within days, and it was exactly what everyone had expected. High Commander Vexthul's reply was brief and contemptuous. "The Zeltharan Empire does not require warnings from primitive species about phenomena we have been monitoring for years. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Do not contact us again with your false intelligence." On Zelthara Prime, the situation was very different from what Vexthul's message suggested. The Empire's scientists had detected the same anomalies that Kate Williams had observed, but they were struggling to understand what they meant. The lead scientist, a brilliant but arrogant researcher named Kethmore, had been dismissing the warnings of his junior staff for weeks. "The gravitational fluctuations are within acceptable parameters," Kethmore announced to his team. "Our technology can compensate for any instabilities in the system. The Empire has faced challenges before and overcome them through superior science and engineering." But one of his junior researchers, a young Zeltharan named Yildena, was not convinced. She had been studying the human warning message in secret, and she found their analysis more thorough and more accurate than anything her own team had produced. The humans had identified patterns that the Zeltharan scientists had missed, and their predictions were far more detailed and specific. Yildena had done something that was almost unthinkable for a Zeltharan. She had spent months studying human behavior and human science. What she had found challenged everything she had been taught about the supposed inferiority of other species. Human scientific methods were different from Zeltharan approaches, but they were not primitive. In some ways, they were more thorough and more accurate because they included perspectives and techniques that Zeltharan science had rejected as unnecessary. The humans used cooperation even in their scientific work. Teams of researchers from different colonies would work together on problems, sharing data and techniques freely. They tested their theories against multiple independent sources and welcomed criticism from their peers. Zeltharan science, by contrast, was hierarchical. Senior scientists made decisions that junior researchers were expected to accept without question. Yildena tried to raise her concerns with Kethmore, but he dismissed her just as quickly as he had dismissed the human warning. The humans are trying to create panic so they can offer their assistance and make us dependent on them, he declared. It is a primitive psychological manipulation, exactly what we would expect from a species that relies on cooperation rather than strength. General Thuvok, the military commander responsible for defending the home system, was more practical in his concerns. He had been reviewing the Empire's evacuation capabilities and finding them severely limited. The Zeltharan fleet was designed for conquest, not rescue. Their ships could transport troops and weapons with great efficiency, but they had very little capacity for civilian evacuation. High Commander, Thuvok reported to Vex Thul, if we needed to evacuate our populations from threatened worlds, our current fleet could transport perhaps 10% of our people. The rest would have to rely on civilian vessels, which lack the speed and range for interstellar evacuation. Vex Thul was not concerned. General, the Empire does not retreat. We adapt and overcome. If there are challenges to our home system, we will find technological solutions. We have always done so. But privately, some of the Empire's leaders were beginning to worry. Intelligence reports from their conquered territories spoke of growing unrest. Several subject species had attempted rebellions in recent months, and, while all had been crushed quickly, they suggested that fear alone might not be enough to maintain control indefinitely. The irony was lost on most Zeltharans, but not on Yildena. The Empire had spent decades conquering other species and forcing them into submission, but they had made no real allies. Every species under Zeltharan rule obeyed out of fear, not loyalty. If the Empire ever showed weakness, if they ever needed help from others, they would find themselves completely alone. Meanwhile, humanity continued its peaceful expansion. New colonies were established through negotiation and cooperation. Trade routes expanded to include dozens of species. Cultural exchanges brought new ideas and innovations that benefited everyone involved. The human approach took longer and required more patience. But it was creating something that the Zeltharan Empire had never achieved: a true community of worlds working together by choice. Dr. Chris Johnson completed another successful terraforming project, turning a barren world into a garden that could support millions of beings. Commander Amy Rodriguez established medical clinics that served not just humans, but several other species as well. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding a larger exploration vessel, made contact with 3 new. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came at dawn on Zelthara Prime, when the smaller of the 2 moons simply disappeared. Not destroyed, not broken apart, but gone as if it had never existed. The larger moon lasted another 6 hours, before it too vanished, leaving behind only a spiral of debris that glowed with an eerie light as it was pulled into an invisible point in space. High Commander Vex Thul stood in the central command chamber of the Imperial Palace, watching the reports flood in from across the home system. The micro-black hole that human scientists had warned about was no longer theoretical. It was real, it was growing, and it was consuming everything in its path with an appetite that seemed to increase every hour. Impossible, Kethmore kept repeating as he stared at his instruments. The calculations showed we had years before any serious effects. The gravitational field should have been stable for at least another decade. But Yildena, working at a secondary station, had different numbers on her screen. Senior scientist, the human projections were more accurate than ours. If we had listened to their warning 3 months ago, we could have begun evacuation procedures then. Now we have perhaps weeks before the black hole's gravity well reaches Zelthara Prime itself. Kethmore turned on her with fury. You dare to suggest that primitive human science is superior to the research of the Empire? Your obsession with these inferior beings has clouded your judgment. My obsession has given me accurate data, Yildena replied with unusual boldness. The humans predicted the timeline within days. They predicted the gravitational cascade effects. They predicted the orbital destabilization of our moons. Everything they warned us about is happening exactly as they said it would. General Thuvok entered the command chamber with news that made the situation even worse. Hi, Commander. We have begun emergency evacuation procedures, but our capabilities are severely limited. Our military transports can carry perhaps 50,000 people per trip, and we need at least 48 hours between trips to refuel and recharge. At current capacity, we can evacuate approximately 2 million people per month. Vex Thul's crystal skin shifted to a darker shade, a sign of extreme stress among his species. How many people need to be evacuated? The current population of Zelthara Prime is 47 million. The populations of the outer colonies add another 30 million. If we focus only on essential personnel and government officials, we might be able to save perhaps 5 million of our people. The mathematics were brutal and simple. The Zeltharan Empire, for all its military might and technological superiority, lacked the basic infrastructure needed to save its own population. Their warships were designed to project power, not preserve life. Their transport vessels were built to move troops and weapons, not civilians and families. They had conquered dozens of worlds, but had never considered that they might someday need to abandon their own. What about the subject species? Vex Thul asked. Can we commandeer their vessels for evacuation purposes? Thuvok's expression was grim. High Commander, the subject species have minimal spacefaring capability. We deliberately limited their access to advanced transportation technology to prevent rebellion. Most of them have only basic atmospheric craft and short-range shuttles. The few that have interstellar capability are either too small to be useful or too slow to be effective. The irony was devastating. The Empire had kept other species weak to maintain control, and now that weakness meant they could not help even if they wanted to. But more importantly, the question of whether they would want to help was becoming increasingly relevant. Intelligence reports were coming in from across the Empire's territory. The subject species had learned about the crisis on Zelthara Prime, and their reactions were not what the Imperial leadership had hoped for. Instead of offering aid, many were celebrating. Some were openly preparing for rebellion, assuming that the collapse of the home world would mean the end of Imperial control. On the conquered world of Tekvar, the local population had seized control of the Zeltharan military installations. The moment news of the crisis arrived. On Melthorn, the subject species had driven out their Zeltharan overseers and declared independence. Similar uprisings were beginning on worlds throughout the Empire. They hate us, Thuvok reported with something like surprise in his voice. After all we have done to bring order and civilization to their worlds, they hate us. Yildena looked up from her calculations. General, what did we do to bring them order and civilization? We conquered them, enslaved them, and took their resources. We ruled them through fear and treated them as inferior beings. Why would they help us now when we are weak? Because it is the rational thing to do, Vexithul said, but his voice lacked conviction. If the Empire falls, they lose the protection and technology we have provided them. The protection we provided was protection from us, Yildena replied. The technology we gave them was just enough to serve our purposes, never enough to improve their lives significantly. We gave them nothing that would make them grateful. We only gave them reasons to fear us. The young scientist had been studying more than human science during the past months. She had been studying human history, human philosophy, and human methods of building relationships with other species. What she had learned was revolutionary by Zeltharan standards. The humans actually made other species stronger, not weaker. They shared their best technology freely. They helped solve problems without asking for anything in return. They treated other species as equals, not subjects. As a result, when humans faced crises, other species rushed to help them. When human colonies were threatened by natural disasters, alien allies sent aid without being asked. When human explorers needed assistance, they could count on dozens of species to provide it. The humans had built something that the Zeltharan Empire had never achieved: genuine friendship across the stars. The evacuation efforts continued desperately for 2 more weeks, but they were clearly insufficient. The black hole's gravitational effects were accelerating, and the planet's surface was beginning to crack under the stress. Massive earthquakes shook every continent. The atmosphere was becoming unstable as gravitational forces pulled at it from different directions. Storms raged across the surface with winds that reached speeds never before recorded. Vexthul stood in his command chamber, watching his homeworld die. The reports from the evacuation sites were grim. Families were being torn apart as transport ships filled to capacity and took off, leaving thousands behind. Children were separated from parents. The elderly and sick were abandoned because they took up too much space and resources. "High Commander," General Tuvok approached with obvious reluctance. "We have evacuated 2.3 million people. At current rates, we might be able to save another million before the planet becomes uninhabitable. But we are running out of time and resources. What about requesting aid from the subject worlds?" Vexthul asked, though he already knew the answer. The subject worlds are either in rebellion or claim they lack the capability to help. Several have stated explicitly that they consider this to be cosmic justice for the Empire's actions. Yildena had been quiet for several minutes, working at her station with intense concentration. Finally, she looked up and spoke words that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. "High Commander, there is one option we have not considered. The humans have the largest civilian fleet in known space. Their transport capabilities are specifically designed for humanitarian purposes. Their medical ships, colony transports, and evacuation vessels could carry millions of people. If we ask them for help..." The command chamber fell silent. Every Zeltharan present understood the implications of what she was suggesting. Ask the humans for help. Ask the species they had dismissed as inferior and primitive. Ask the beings they had scorned and rejected. "They would never help us," Kethmore said. "We rejected their offers of friendship. We called them weak and primitive. We told them we had no need for charity from lesser beings. Why would they risk their ships and their people to save us?" Yildena looked directly at Vexthul. "Because that is what humans do. I have studied their history, their culture, their responses to crises. When the Andromedans faced the Theta virus outbreak, humans sent medical aid even though the Andromedans had tried to claim human territory just years earlier. When the crystalline collective's home star went nova, humans provided evacuation, assistance, even though the collective had never offered them anything in return. Humans help people who need help, regardless of whether those people have been friendly to them. "You are suggesting that human kindness is not weakness," Vexthul said slowly. I am suggesting that human kindness is a form of strength we never understood. They build relationships that survive crises. They create loyalty through generosity rather than through fear. When they need help, others want to help them. When we need help, we discover that we are alone. The debate continued for hours, while the planet continued to shake and the black hole continued to grow. Finally, as reports came in of complete atmospheric breakdown in the southern hemisphere, Vexathol made the most difficult decision of his life. "Send a message to the humans," he said quietly. "Tell them that the message from High Commander Vex Thol arrived at Luna Station in the early hours of Tuesday morning, transmitted on emergency frequencies with a priority code that automatically woke every senior official in the human government." President Elena Martinez was in her office within an hour, surrounded by her top advisors and military commanders, all of them staring at the communication that none of them had expected to ever receive. The transmission was brief, formal, and desperate. High Commander Vexthul, who had once declared that the Zeltharan Empire had no need for charity from lesser beings, was now formally requesting immediate humanitarian assistance for the evacuation of his entire species. The proud leader who had dismissed human offers of friendship was now pleading for human mercy. 47 million people, Admiral Ben Carter said quietly, reading the technical specifications that had accompanied the request. They need to evacuate 47 million people from their homeworld, plus another 30 million from their outer colonies. They have perhaps 3 weeks before their star system becomes completely uninhabitable. Dr. Lisa Hayes was studying the gravitational data that the Zeltharans had finally shared with humanity. "Kate Williams was right about the timeline," she said. "Actually, she was conservative. The black hole is growing faster than any of our models predicted. The Zeltharans might have days, not weeks. How many people can we evacuate in that time frame?" President Martinez asked. Admiral Carter pulled up his fleet status reports. "Our entire civilian transport capacity is approximately 12 million people per week, assuming we can maintain continuous operations. But that's spread across dozens of star systems. To concentrate that capacity in the Zeltharan system would require pulling ships from every human colony, leaving our own people without transportation or emergency evacuation capability." "Do it," Martinez said without hesitation. "Madam President," Admiral Carter said carefully, "I need to point out that this is an enormous risk. We would be committing our entire civilian fleet to help people who have been hostile to us for years. If this is some kind of trap, if the Zeltharans are planning to capture our ships or take our people hostage, we would be defenseless." "Admiral," Martinez replied, "when someone is drowning, you don't stop to ask if they like you before you throw them a rope. Give the order. I want every available transport ship heading for the Zeltharan system within 6 hours." The response was unprecedented in human history. Admiral Carter sent out the call, and within minutes, civilian ship captains throughout human space were volunteering for the mission. Transport vessels designed for moving cargo began converting their holds for passenger service. Medical ships, prepared for the largest refugee crisis ever encountered. Colony ships that had just finished delivering settlers to new worlds immediately began preparing for return trips with alien passengers. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the heavy cruiser Unity, received his orders while patrolling the outer rim territories. He was to lead the evacuation fleet and coordinate with Zeltharan authorities for the rescue operation. As he set course for the Zeltharan system, he remembered the last words he had spoken to Vexthul 3 years earlier. "If you ever need help, you know where to find us." Dr. Lisa Hayes was appointed as the mission's chief science officer, responsible for adapting human life support systems to accommodate Zeltharan physiology. She worked with engineer Tony Blake and his team to design emergency modifications that could be installed on transport ships during the journey to the Zeltharan system. The atmospheric requirements are similar to ours, Tony reported as they reviewed the specifications. But their body chemistry is completely different. We'll need to adjust humidity levels, atmospheric pressure, and electromagnetic field strength. The good news is that these modifications are possible. The bad news is that we'll need to do them while the ships are in transit. The first human ships arrived in the Zeltharan system 2 days after receiving the distress call. What they found was a scene of chaos and devastation that none of them had imagined. Zelthara Prime was breaking apart, its surface cracked by massive tectonic shifts caused by the black hole's gravitational pull. The atmosphere was boiling away into space, creating aurora effects that painted the sky in brilliant colors even, as they signaled the planet's death. Captain Jake Morrison opened communications with the Zeltharan Command Center as soon as his ship entered the system. "Hi, Commander Vexthul. This is Captain Morrison of the human vessel Unity. We have received your request for assistance and we are here to help." The response came quickly, but Vexthul's voice was different from what Jake remembered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded like humility mixed with disbelief. "Captain Morrison, we did not expect you to respond so quickly. Or at all. We are prepared to discuss terms for your assistance, including payment for services, and guarantees for the safety of your vessels." "Hi, Commander," Jake replied. "There are no terms to discuss and no payment required. We're here to save lives. Please coordinate with our fleet commanders to begin immediate evacuation procedures." The evacuation began within hours of the human fleet's arrival, but it quickly became clear that the operation would be far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Many Zeltharans were initially suspicious of human motives. Some believed that the humans had caused the black hole as an act of revenge. Others thought it was an elaborate trap to capture and enslave their population. Yildena found herself serving as a liaison between the human rescue teams and the Zeltharan population. She had studied human culture and language extensively, making her one of the few Zeltharans who could communicate effectively with the rescue workers. "Your people are afraid," she explained to Commander Amy Rodriguez, who was coordinating medical support for the evacuees. "They do not understand why you would help us after the way we treated you." Amy smiled gently. "That's understandable, but please tell them that we're not here for revenge or to make a point. We're here because no one deserves to die like this, regardless of what has happened in the past." The evacuation sites were scenes of incredible heroism as human crews worked around the clock to save as many lives as possible. Pilot Sarah Kim flew her atmospheric transport through gravitational storms that should have torn her ship apart, making repeated trips to rescue stranded civilians from the planet's surface. Her ship suffered severe damage on every flight, but she refused to stop until the last person was evacuated from her assigned sector. Dr. Ryan Foster set up medical stations on every transport ship, treating Zeltharan refugees despite having no previous experience with. 6 months after the evacuation of Zelthara Prime, the morning sun rose over New Haven Colony, casting golden light across fields where humans and Zeltharans worked side by side to plant the first harvest on their shared world. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. Former enemies, now partners, former conquerors, now refugees, learning the value of cooperation. High Commander Vexthul stood at the edge of one of these fields, no longer wearing the crystalline armor of Imperial authority, but simple work clothes similar to those worn by the human colonists. His hands, which had once commanded fleets that conquered worlds, now held farming tools as he learned techniques that human agriculturalists had been perfecting for centuries. The soil composition is different from what we knew on Zelthara Prime, he said to Dr. Matt Green, the human scientist who had been teaching him sustainable farming methods. But your techniques seem to work even better than our old methods did. Matt smiled and adjusted his wide-brimmed hat against the morning sun. That's because we learned these techniques from dozens of different species across hundreds of different worlds. Each species contributed something unique to our understanding of agriculture. When you share knowledge freely, everyone benefits. This conversation would have been impossible during the days of the Empire. Vexthul would never have spoken to a human as an equal, much less asked for instruction in what he would have considered primitive techniques. But the evacuation had changed everything about how the Zeltharans saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. The rescue operation had been completed with a success rate that astounded everyone involved. Of the 47 million Zeltharans on their homeworld, when the crisis began, over 43 million had been saved. The human evacuation fleet had worked continuously for 3 weeks, making thousands of trips through increasingly dangerous conditions as the black hole consumed more of the Zeltharan system. The final evacuation runs had been especially heroic. As Zelthara Prime entered its death spiral, volunteer human crews had continued to ferry refugees to safety even as gravitational forces threatened to tear their ships apart. Captain Sarah Kim had made 17 trips to the planet's surface. On the final day, each time bringing her damaged atmospheric transport back with hundreds more survivors. The cost had been significant but not overwhelming. 5 human ships had been lost to gravitational anomalies, taking their crews of 43 brave individuals who had died as heroes. Their sacrifice had saved thousands of Zeltharan lives, and their memory was honored in monuments on every world where the refugees had been settled. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real transformation had happened during the evacuation itself, as millions of Zeltharans experienced human kindness firsthand. Refugee families had been fed with food from human personal supplies. Injured Zeltharans had been treated by human medical personnel who worked around the clock despite having no training in alien physiology. Frightened children had been comforted by human volunteers who spoke no Zeltharan but communicated through gentle actions and patient care. Carol Martinez, who had been appointed as Director of Refugee Integration, had overseen the settlement of Zeltharan refugees across 43 human colonies and 12 allied worlds. Each group had been welcomed not as displaced enemies, but as new neighbors who brought valuable skills and perspectives to their adopted homes. Integration has been smoother than we expected, Carol reported to President Elena Martinez during their weekly briefing. The Zeltharans are hard workers and quick learners. More importantly, they seem genuinely grateful for the help they've received. Many of them are actively looking for ways to contribute to their new communities. Some of the most successful integration efforts had taken place on worlds where Zeltharans could use their advanced technical knowledge to solve local problems. On Henderson Colony, Zeltharan engineers had helped design new water purification systems that were more efficient than anything the colonists had used before. On Marcus Station, Zeltharan scientists had contributed to research projects that benefited not just humans, but several allied species. But perhaps the most significant changes were happening in the attitudes and beliefs of the refugees themselves. Yildena had been appointed as the first Zeltharan ambassador to humanity, and she had spent months traveling between refugee settlements to help her people understand and adapt to their new circumstances. We called human cooperation a sign of weakness, she explained to a gathering of refugees on New Haven Colony. We believed that strength came from domination, from forcing others to serve our will. But we have learned that true strength comes from building relationships that survive crisis. When we were strong, we had no friends. When we needed help, we discovered that we were alone. The humans have shown us a different way. The transformation was most visible in the person of High Commander Vexthul himself, the proud leader who had once declared that the Zeltharan Empire had no need for charity from lesser beings, now spent his days learning human agricultural techniques and philosophy. He had requested to be assigned to the most basic labor on New Haven Colony, saying that he needed to understand what it meant to build rather than conquer. I spent my life believing that power came from the ability to destroy, he told Dr. Matt, green as they worked together in the fields. I measured the success of our civilization by how many worlds we could conquer, how many species we could force into submission. But destruction is easy. Creation is difficult. Building something that lasts, something that benefits everyone involved. This requires a kind of strength that we never developed. The former General Thuvok had undergone a similar transformation. The military commander who had once led conquest fleets was now studying human conflict resolution techniques and teaching younger Zeltharans about the difference between leadership through fear and leadership through respect. Our military doctrine was based on overwhelming force, he explained to his students at the New Haven Integration Center. We believed that if we were strong enough, fast enough, and ruthless enough, we could solve any problem through conquest. But force only works as long as you are stronger than everyone else. When we faced a crisis that could not be conquered, we discovered that our approach had left us with no one to turn to for help. The changes were not happening without challenges. Some Zeltharans struggled to adapt to their new circumstances, and continued to believe that their former empire had been superior to human society. A few had formed isolated communities where they tried to maintain the old ways, though these groups were gradually shrinking as their members were drawn to the prosperity and cooperation of the integrated settlements. But the vast majority of Zeltharan refugees had embraced their new lives with enthusiasm that surprised even the human settlement coordinators. Dr. Chris Johnson, who had been working with Zeltharan scientists to develop new terraforming techniques, reported that his alien colleagues were some of the most dedicated researchers he had ever worked with. They approach scientific problems with a thoroughness that is remarkable, he explained to his research team. But what's really changed is their attitude toward sharing information. In the old empire, scientific knowledge was hoarded for military advantage. Now they share everything they learn, because they've seen how much faster progress happens when everyone works together. The most symbolic moment of the transformation came when High Commander Vexthul requested a private meeting with Captain Jake Morrison. The two leaders met in the simple conference room of the New Haven Colony Administration Building, a far cry from the crystal halls where they had first encountered each other. Captain Morrison, Vexthul began, I owe you an apology that is long overdue. When we first met, I dismissed you and your people as primitive and weak. I believed that your offers of friendship were signs of desperation, that your willingness to help others was evidence of your inferiority. Jake nodded but said nothing, allowing the former High Commander to continue. I understand now that I was wrong about everything. Your people are not weak. You are stronger than we ever were. Your cooperation is not primitive. It is sophisticated. Social technology that creates bonds stronger than any conquest. Your willingness to help even enemies is not desperation. It is wisdom that we are only beginning to understand. Vexthul paused. His crystalline features shifting to colors that Jake had learned indicated deep emotion among his species. My people called your kindness weakness. We have learned that it was strength. We thought your cooperation made you vulnerable. We have learned that it made you powerful. We believed that helping others would make you poor. We have learned that it made you rich in ways we never imagined. High Commander, Jake replied. We didn't help your people because we wanted to. Prove a point or teach you a lesson. We helped because it was the right thing to do. Everyone deserves a chance at life and happiness, regardless of their past actions. That is exactly what I mean, Vexthul said. That attitude. The belief that all intelligent life has value. That everyone deserves help when they need it. This is what makes humanity remarkable. It is what makes you truly civilized.